Ah. Ah. I've been waiting for a guy to come and take me by the hand. Can these sensations make me feel the pleasures of a normal man? I was pretty excited to see what Queens of the Stone Age would come back with after a 6-year break, and not that I've been an avid fan of them for that long, but having dived through their whole discography recently, I was struck with how consistently great their sound was, even compared with other rock bands starting at around the same time. Bands like The Strokes and The Killers, who have albums I individually like more than Queens of the Stone Age, but who haven't been able to maintain their quality over the last 20 years. What I was most excited for this project was the sonic direction they'd take. Whether you like them or not, it's clear that Queens of the Stone Age usually opt for a pretty consistent sound palette on their projects. The squeaky clean production of Villains, the eerie lullabies to Paralyze, the spacey rated R, etc. And I can safely say that In Times New Roman has a similar type of sonic thesis. That thesis is basically, how can we make the most annoying riff of all time sound good? And by God, they actually manage it most of the time. Look, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that In Times New Roman reinvents the Queens of the Stone Age wheel or anything. These tracks are, at heart, fundamentally solid hard rock tracks that abide by what the band has been doing for the last 20 years. Emotion Sickness, for example, was the lead single for the project and might be the most straight and narrow they play on the whole thing. It's not a bad thing, it's a fun enough track with a super engaging vocal performance, and while it doesn't compare to anything on the album it clearly wants to be from, like Clockwork, it works on this project as a pretty universally enjoyable track. But if Motion Sickness is the most straight and narrow song on the album, it kinda indicates that the project is gonna be a little out there. And look, you can have your own opinions on whether you think this was a good move or not. I've got my own issues with the sonic direction that I'll talk about later. But even as someone who enjoyed Villains more than most people, I was still thrilled that we weren't going to be seeing similar production at the very least. Because Villains was ultimately a bit of a warning sign that the band might have been moving towards selling out. They brought in Mark Ronson as lead producer, a guy with some pretty respectable cred in the pop scene, but whose only other credit on a rock project was for Miley fucking Cyrus, on an album with many of the same issues as Villains. It all pointed towards a downward trend that we just hoped wouldn't be coming for the group. So, I could probably be forgiven for having an initial reaction of, well, thank God it's something different, 9 out of 10, album of the year. Needless to say, my enthusiasm has died down a little, but there's something to be said, right, for my immediate positive reaction to the overall project and how immediately sticky some of the work here is. So, after a little time to think on it and plenty more listens, how does it sit? My eye. Nah. Well, one thing that's important to note is that In Times New Roman comes off way better once you put it in context. It's a perfectly fine album if you've been waiting for 6 years. It's a damn good album once you understand that in those 6 years, Josh Homme has been going through a bit of divorce, custody battles, a fight with cancer, and deaths of close friends. A lot of these tracks, particularly early on, shine a pretty significant light on Homme's feelings on his legal battles. The trio of Paper Machete, Negative Space, and Emotion Sickness painting a devastating picture of fury and resignation that works so much better with a complete understanding of what he's going through. Alternatively, a few of the tracks here, such as The Run of Maid to Parade, Carnavoyeur, and What the People Say, take on a surprisingly revolutionary tone that actually felt kind of annoying and preachy until you realize that, oh yeah, he literally had cancer. And all of a sudden, Homme basically rewording the Serenity Prayer on Carnavoyeur doesn't sound so bad. I don't know. I don't want to just give him a free pass because of the shit he's been through, but ultimately it does affect my consumption of this album to know the story behind it. And for all the attention the strange off-the-wall sound of the project might get, it probably deserves at least equal focus on what is a pretty consistently dark, depressing, and incredibly witty stream of commentary. Take Paper Machete, for example, a track that I'm actually still pretty mixed on because I still find the production and mixing to be kind of bad, actually, with a super repetitive main riff and a bridge that just ruins any sort of momentum. But I love it so much, lyrically. From individual lines, such as You Speak Linus and Damsel in Distress so fluently, or In Sickness, No Vows Mean Anything, which are just such cutting moments. But also the overarching concept of a paper machete, someone who seems aggressive and cutting at first, but who breaks down under the slightest pressure. It's the sort of lightning in a bottle imagery that I can't help but love, and it really illustrates what I appreciate so much about the writing on this album. Negative Space follows up pretty brilliantly, actually, continuing Hommy's stream of consciousness about the divorce, but taking a perspective of defeatism rather than fury. And to be perfectly honest, I still like this track a lot more than Paper Machete. It's got less kinetic energy, but the empty space in the instrumental works really well, both for the killer bassline, but also to draw attention to the hook, which is just quintessential Queens of the Stone Age. Elsewhere, the project sees the group exploit their talent for structuring great tracks around a really good hook. The album opener, Obscenery, is one of the best examples of this. It has some pretty great psychedelic touches in the first place, but with the chorus this catchy, what's not to love? I pretty regularly end up singing, "Fuck me stupid," to myself, which probably makes me seem insane, but still, it's great. And as long as we're talking pure bangers on the record, we cannot skip over What the People Say, a song with a pretty average intro that quickly explodes into the most fun track on the project, with a ton of switch-ups and two distinct yet incredibly earwormy choruses. Most notable is that, like, "Tonight is the night" hook, with those up-close and personal refrains, pulling from a garage rock style that I adore. Overall, I think it's fair to say that I mostly fuck with the sound on this thing. It's definitely trying hard to be a little less complete than other projects from the band. The tracks don't sound lazy or anything, but more intentionally messy, and it's easy to find a certain level of catharsis within the wild nature of Negative Space, Carnavoyeur, and plenty of others. Unfortunately, I just don't think it really clicks into gear as a project until the second half, despite the fact that I enjoyed the overall sonic palette. I've already talked about how Paper Machete doesn't do a ton for me, but beyond that, I think In Times New Roman hits a real low point with Time and Place and Made to Parade, particularly the latter. Time and Place I can at least understand getting positive reception. I've seen multiple people name it as one of their favourites on the record, and with the way the track devolves into madness, I kinda get it. Personally, I just find it repetitive though, and that back and forth, whatever it is infuriating. It's so unrelenting that it makes my hair stand on end until you get a brief moment of respite in the third verse, which, to be fair, kinda slaps. Made to Parade is the real stinker though, probably the only track here I genuinely hate. From the awful honky-tonky ass dad rock riff to the deeply uninteresting criticism of capitalism or the music industry, I'm still not entirely sure which, there's just nothing enjoyable here. Most importantly, Hommy's vocal mix is going to haunt my nightmares. He's inside my fucking head. After that, though, the album is pretty much straight fire, with only Sicily feeling slightly less memorable than the others. I guess it makes sense given how much it reminded me of the more sinister side of Lullabies to Paralyze, one of my least favourite Queens of the Stone Age albums. In the track's defence, it's probably a step above those tracks, and has some great touches like the hair-raising string plucking during the instrumental passages, but it's definitely the weakest track for the second half. And of course, it would be weird to talk about the second half without talking about the crowning jewel of Straight Jacket Fitting. Probably my favourite track here. At first I was a little concerned I was just gaslighting myself into liking it due to the extreme length, but no, I think it really is just that good. A twisted, ever-changing structure, a real guttural vocal performance, and the sort of mind-melting instrumental I was crying out for most of the album. Just a really irresistible track, the sort of thing that really struck a chord with me. So yeah, there it is, a series of ramblings about my opinions on In Times New Roman. In terms of final thoughts, look, there's arguments to be made for this project being on both the upper and lower rungs of the Queens of the Stone Age discography. I'd argue it's somewhere in the middle, with a pretty consistent and excellent set of songs and lyrics ruined by the occasional head-scratcher. While it doesn't sit amongst their upper echelon, it's ultimately a sign that they're back and ready without having to resort to flattening their production like on their previous effort. 7 out of 10, but unfortunately, I'm just more excited for the follow-up effort in Comic Sans. It's the worst fucking joke in the world. I think YouTube's meant to do a fucking... Remember to like and subscribe. Whatever the other thing...